Hello, horror stories. My name is Daniel. I'm from Minneapolis, United States. I have always been fascinated by paranormal stories. But everything changed for me in 2018 when I experienced one such experience firsthand. Since then, I have never been the same. Until that moment, I had never experienced something so shocking, and I still have a hard time getting over it because of how delicate it was.
It happened one cold night in December. I was traveling to my parents' city, which is almost 2 hours away from where I live. That night I bought my bus ticket for 12 p.m. I was working in a bar as a waiter at that time, and my shift ended at 10 p.m. and I had to stop by home to change and pick up my suitcase and some gifts I was carrying.
We left the central station and headed out onto the highway, which in itself is quite intimidating at night due to the total darkness. For those of you who live in this area, you know how tense it is to travel these night roads. Besides being narrow and with sharp curves, there is very little lighting.
I was not traveling with fear, but with a bit of nervousness. However, the desire to see my family at that time was much stronger for me. We were already halfway through the trip, and it was a little after 1 a.m. The bus was almost empty. With barely any light, the bus was almost empty, with only about 7 people on board. I never managed to fall asleep on the way due to the anxiety of wanting to get there, plus the route is quite short. So, as usual, I put on my headphones, listening to music looking out the window, even though I could see absolutely nothing outside. Suddenly, I began to notice that the bus was gradually starting to slow down, even though there didn't seem to be anything in the way. I stood up and looked ahead, expecting to find a police checkpoint, as there usually are on the road. Or maybe a broken down car in the middle of the road, but there was nothing.
Even some passengers woke up, and we all looked out to see what was going on. As I was sitting almost in front, I could see that there were 4 people standing by the door of the bus, 3 men and a woman, begging to be let on.
What struck me most was that they were in the middle of nowhere at that time of night, dressed in summer clothes, almost like dirty rags, even though we were in the middle of winter. I looked at my phone and the temperature read 1 degree, but they didn't seem to mind despite their light clothing. The bus began to speed up slowly as I watched these people through the window. They were still walking around, standing at the door of the bus, begging to be let on the bus, banging on the doors.
Suddenly, the driver asked us to close the windows and remain seated. Some passengers who had their windows open closed them, although most of them had already done so because of the cold. However, I did not. Curiosity got the better of me, and I wanted to understand what was going on. The whole situation was very confusing. The atmosphere suddenly became tense. The driver accelerated, and, in an instant, those people disappeared as if they had vanished into the darkness. It was a chilling moment. The driver said nothing, just continued driving to our destination. The weather became even thicker with the fog enveloping us in a matter of seconds, and the cold was bone-chilling. However, I could not remain in doubt. I waited for all the passengers to get off so that I could be the last one to ask the bus driver what had happened in that gap where we had stopped, and above all, who those people were. As I approached and asked him the question, he seemed reluctant to answer at first. His expression changed drastically, becoming serious in a matter of seconds. However, I didn't want to remain in doubt and continued to insist. Finally, he told me something that really got me thinking deeply. He told me that several colleagues in the company had already warned him about that stretch of road, mentioning that 4 immigrants had died in inhumane and inexplicable circumstances. He said he stopped thinking they were people in need of help. However, when they started banging on the bus door and he saw their attire, he remembered his colleagues' warnings about the 3 men and 1 woman, and the recommendation to never stop if they appeared. So, still with trembling hands firmly on the steering wheel, he decided to move forward and leave them behind. Listening to him, my legs went slack. I had looked straight into the eyes of that woman who, despite her heartbreaking appearance, seemed to be flesh and blood. I couldn't get what had happened out of my mind. I found it hard to believe that it had all been real. The idea of having been so close to something so supernatural disturbed me deeply. The conversation with the driver echoed in my mind. I wondered how it was possible for such stories to come true, and if we had really been in contact with these wandering spirits. The atmosphere in the bus was still charged, although now the cold air seemed less dense and the haze had dissipated. He strongly urged me not to tell anyone so as not to create fear in the passengers. I assured him that I had no intention of doing so and thanked him for sharing his experience. Despite his sincerity, I found it hard to believe him at first. The story seemed too unbelievable. When I finally arrived at my destination, I was met by my family, who greeted me with warm hugs and relieved smiles. I tried to remain calm and enjoy the reunion, but the images of that night kept swirling in my mind, preventing me from letting go of the bewilderment and fear I had experienced. After my family received me, late at night, we went to bed. I went to the bedroom, lit the small candle on the bedside table, and began researching on the internet about any incidents on that stretch of road involving dead immigrants. I gasped when I found an article in a local newspaper in the area. The headline talked about a tragic accident that had occurred years before on that same road. The story detailed how a group of immigrants had lost their lives in extremely violent and disconcerting circumstances. The article mentioned that after the accident, authorities found 3 men and 1 woman in heartbreaking condition. The news confirmed what the bus driver had told me, and that's when I knew it was true. I found a picture of them in the article, and I recognized the woman. It was the same woman with straight, long, dark hair who had been asking to get on the bus with those men. I would be lying to you if I said I remembered what the 3 men looked like, as I could barely make out their faces due to the darkness, but her I recognized clearly. According to what the driver had told me, that woman and the others had already appeared on other buses, doing exactly the same thing. That confirmation left me with a mixture of disbelief and horror as I tried to assimilate what I had experienced and the frightening coincidences between my experience and the tragedy that had occurred in that same place. And I knew I had to return after the holidays by bus along that same route. At that moment, the light on the nightstand began to flicker, plunging the room into complete darkness. My heart was racing as I tried to turn the light back on, but the switch didn't respond. The only source of light was the faint glow filtering in from the hallway. I tried to calm myself, thinking maybe it was an electrical problem. But just as I was about to get up to get a flashlight, I heard a light knock on the door. The sound made me jump, and I slowly approached, wondering if it could be just a coincidence. When I opened the door, there was no one there. However, a sharp chill crept into the room, and the feeling of being watched became overwhelming. I looked down the hallway, but there was no sign of movement. I decided to return to bed, trying to ignore the growing restlessness. Fatigue finally got the better of me, and I managed to get some rest. The next night, when they were all asleep, I lit a white candle and prayed for each of them, asking that they would find peace and that their soul would be able to go on its way, leaving behind the gap between life and death. I felt a sense of relief in saying that prayer, although I can't be sure if it had the desired effect. A few days later, on the bus ride home, they did not appear again. Perhaps that night in my room, they were just trying to communicate with me to find their peace. I will never know. If you have enjoyed this story, we invite you to subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any others. Until next time.